The first shot rang out just as Susannah Lawson jumped from the stagecoach, her men's trousers catching on a splinter as the dust of Walla Walla, Washington Territory, settled around her boots. It was 1878, and nothing about her arrival was going according to plan. Good Lord Almighty! Exclaimed the portly stage-coach driver as he ducked reflexively, though the gunfire seemed to be coming from the saloon down the street. You're lucky those bullets ain't aimed at you, miss, though dressed like that, who could tell you from a man? Susannah straightened, brushing the trail dust from her practical canvas trousers. At 23, she had learned to weather such comments, though they still stung. Her late father's voice echoed in her mind, "Susie, let them talk, you know what suits you best." And what suited her for a 2,000-mile journey from Boston were certainly not the impractical skirts and petticoats society deemed appropriate. "My attire is none of your concern," she replied firmly, handing the man his fare. "Now, can you direct me to Thornton's Hardware and Mercantile?" The driver snorted, pointing down the main street. "End of the road, can't miss it. The owner might mistake you for a new ranch hand, though." Ignoring his laughter, Susannah collected her 2 well-worn leather trunks and began the walk down Walla Walla's main street. The frontier town was exactly as her uncle had described in his letters, bustling with a mix of settlers, ranchers, and miners, all trying to carve out a living in the shadow of the Blue Mountains. Horses were tied to hitching posts, and wooden boardwalks lined storefronts bearing hand-painted signs. The smell of hay, horses, and humanity hung in the air. As she walked, heads turned. Women in calico dresses paused their conversations to stare. Mothers pulled children closer as if her trousers might somehow corrupt their young minds, and men stopped mid-stride, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright disdain. "Look at that, a woman in pants," came a loud female voice from the dress shop. "What indecency! Perhaps she thinks she's a man," replied her companion with a laugh that cut through the street noise. Susannah kept her chin high, though her cheeks burned. Her practical attire had served her well on the long journey west, allowing her to climb in and out of stage coaches, protect her modesty during river crossings, and sleep comfortably during overnight trips. In Boston, such clothing had earned her the reputation of an eccentric, but her family name and her father's medical practice had provided some shield from the worst of society's judgment. Here, she was a stranger with no protection. As she neared the Mercantile, the street widened into the town square. A crowd had gathered, and in the center stood Sheriff Mills, his badge catching the afternoon sun as he addressed the townsfolk. "And I'm telling you all that Jasper Wilkins will face justice for stealing that horse. The territory has laws, and we aim to follow them." The crowd murmured approval, but Susannah noticed several rough-looking men at the edges who seemed less than enthusiastic about the sheriff's proclamation. One spit tobacco onto the dusty street and muttered something that made his companions laugh darkly. Susannah edged around the gathering, hoping to reach the Mercantile without drawing more attention. Her uncle's letter had been clear he would meet her at Thornton's upon her arrival. After losing both parents to influenza the previous winter, Uncle Henry was her only remaining family, and his offer to help her establish a life in the Washington Territory had been a lifeline she'd gratefully accepted. As she approached the Mercantile's broad porch, a commotion erupted from the crowd. A horse reared up, its rider fighting to control it, and the animal's path sent it directly toward her. Susannah froze, her trunk suddenly feeling like anchors. Just as the horse seemed certain to trample her, a strong arm encircled her waist, yanking her up onto the Mercantile's porch and out of harm's way. Her trunks clattered to the ground as the horse thundered past, narrowly missing them. "You all right, miss?" asked a deep voice. Susannah looked up into the face of her rescuer. He was tall and lean, with a sun-bronzed face and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark blonde hair was slightly too long, and a few days' worth of stubble covered his jaw. He wore the practical clothing of a cowboy denim trousers, a work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a worn leather vest. No gun belt, she noted with some relief. "Yes, thank you," she managed, straightening her shirt and stepping away from his steadying hand. "That was most unexpected. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Most things worth experiencing are. His gaze traveled briefly over her attire, but unlike the others, his expression held no judgment. Name's Ethan Townsend. I work at the Diamond Tea Ranch outside town. Susannah Lawson, she replied, offering her hand as she would to any gentleman in Boston. I've just arrived to stay with my uncle, Henry Lawson. Ethan's expression changed, a shadow crossing his features. Henry Lawson, he repeated, taking her hand briefly. His palm was calloused against her skin. Miss Lawson, there she is, the woman in breeches, came a harsh voice, cutting off whatever Ethan had been about to say. Susannah turned to see three women approaching, their expressions pinched with disapproval. The leader, a woman in her 40s wearing an elaborate blue dress with too many ribbons for frontier practicality, pointed an accusatory finger. This is exactly the sort of moral degradation that's ruining our town, the woman declared loudly enough for passers-by to stop and stare. Women dressing as men, what's next? Will you be demanding to vote, to own property without a husband? I already own property, madam, Susannah replied coolly, though her heart raced. And yes, I do believe women should vote. The crowd that had gathered for the sheriff's announcement now shifted their attention to this new spectacle. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. Martha Prescott, Ethan said, stepping slightly forward, this lady just arrived in town not 10 minutes ago. Hardly seems like Christian charity to welcome her this way. The woman Martha sniffed. Mr. Townsend, I wouldn't expect you to understand the importance of proper feminine conduct. Your time is spent with cattle and other cowboys. And honest work it is, he replied evenly. More honest than some I could name. Martha's face flushed at the implied insult. Well, is there a problem here? The sheriff's voice cut through the tension as he approached, his thumbs hooked in his belt. No problem, Sheriff, Ethan answered before Martha could speak. Miss Lawson here just arrived to stay with her Uncle Henry. I was about to help her with her trunks. The sheriff's expression softened with something akin to pity as he looked at Susannah. Henry Lawson's niece, you say? Yes, Susannah confirmed, increasingly confused by the reactions her uncle's name elicited. He was supposed to meet me here. Is something wrong? An uncomfortable silence fell over the small gathering. Even Martha Prescott's indignation seemed to deflate. Miss Lawson, the sheriff said gently, removing his hat, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but Henry Lawson passed away 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quick. The world seemed to tilt beneath Susannah's feet. Her uncle, her last living relative, and her only hope for starting anew was gone. The journey west, the careful planning, the sale of her parents' home to finance her fresh start, all for nothing. I don't understand, she whispered, though of course she did. Death was no stranger after watching both parents succumb to illness. His letter arrived only 2 months ago. He was fine then, the sheriff confirmed. It came on sudden. Doc Simmons did what he could. Martha Prescott and her friends had the decency to look abashed, retreating a few steps. What am I to do now? Susannah asked, more to herself than anyone present. Her funds were limited after the journey, and while she had skills as a teacher, she hadn't secured a position yet. Her uncle's ranch was supposed to provide shelter while she established herself. The ranch, she said suddenly. My uncle's property is yours now, I reckon, the sheriff said, though it's in a state. Henry was behind on some debts and the place needs work. Not to mention a woman can't run a ranch alone, one of Martha's friends added, unable to resist the commentary. Ethan, who had been quiet during this exchange, stepped forward again. Miss Lawson, I knew your uncle. He was a good man who helped me when I first came to the territory. If you'd permit, I'd be happy to take you out to his place and help you sort things. Several eyebrows raised at this offer, and Martha looked positively scandalized. Mr. Townsend, you cannot possibly suggest escorting an unmarried woman to a remote property alone. Think of her reputation. Susannah almost laughed at the absurdity. Her reputation had already been judged and found wanting by these people within minutes of her arrival. I appreciate your concern for my virtue, Mrs. Prescott, Susannah said with more composure than she felt, but I believe Mr. Townsend is offering assistance, not impropriety. She turned to Ethan. Thank you, I would be grateful for your help. The sheriff nodded his approval. Townsend's a good man, Miss Lawson. You could do worse for a guide. He replaced his hat. I'll have my deputy bring by your uncle's personal effects tomorrow. As the crowd dispersed, Ethan easily lifted her trunks. My wagon's hitched behind the mercantile. The Lawson place is about 5 miles outside town. Walking alongside him, Susannah felt the weight of stares following them. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. You don't know me. Ethan glanced at her, those blue eyes direct and honest. Like I said, your uncle helped me once when no one else would. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I don't mind those trousers of yours. Practical for ranch work. You look perfect to me. The simple words, spoken without guile or mockery, warmed something inside Susannah that had been cold since her parents' death. Thank you, she said simply, and for the first time since arriving in Walla Walla, she felt perhaps she wasn't entirely alone. Ethan's wagon was well maintained but clearly used for ranch work. After loading her trunks, he offered his hand to help her climb onto the wooden seat. The leather was warm from the afternoon sun, and Susannah found herself grateful for her trousers as she settled comfortably beside him. I should warn you, Ethan said as he guided the team of horses away from the mercantile, your uncle's place has seen better days. How well did you know him? Susannah asked, watching Walla Walla recede as they headed into open country. He gave me work when I first arrived here 3 years ago. I was green, just off the cattle drive from Texas. Most ranchers wouldn't hire me because I was too skinny, looked too young. Ethan smiled at the memory. Henry said he'd rather have someone eager to learn than someone who thought they knew everything already. The landscape opened around them, rolling hills covered with bunch grass, stands of ponderosa pines, and in the distance, the blue hazed mountains that gave the region its name. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way so different from Boston's manicured commons and orderly streets. After about 8 months, I took a job with the Diamond T, bigger outfit, more opportunity to advance. But your uncle and I stayed friendly. He'd come to town for supplies, we'd share a cup of coffee. Ethan's voice grew quieter. When he got sick, it came on fast. He was in town one day, seemed fine. Next thing we heard, he was bedridden with fever. My parents went the same way, Susannah said softly. Influenza took them within days of each other. Ethan glanced at her, sympathy in his eyes. I'm sorry, losing family's never easy. They rode in companionable silence for a while. Susannah found it strange how comfortable she felt with this man she'd just met. Perhaps it was the way he'd defended her, or the matter-of-fact way he'd accepted her unconventional clothing, or simply that he'd known her uncle. Whatever the reason, Ethan Townsend felt more like an ally than a stranger. So, he said eventually, what were your plans? Before you learned about your uncle, I mean. I trained as a teacher in Boston. Uncle Henry wrote that the territory was desperately short of qualified educators, and that Walla Walla was growing rapidly. He thought I might find a position at one of the new schools. She twisted her hands in her lap. I planned to stay with him until I secured employment and saved enough for my own place. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. The town's school is full up with teachers, but there's talk of starting another one for the outlying farms. Too many children getting no education because they live too far out. Hope flickered in Susannah's chest. Perhaps all wasn't lost. The wagon crested a small rise, and before them lay a valley with a modest ranch house, barn, and corral. A small creek ran behind the buildings, feeding what looked like irrigated fields, though they appeared neglected. Lawson Ranch, Ethan announced, though his tone was apologetic rather than proud. As they drew closer, Susannah saw what he meant about the place having seen better days. The ranch house, a simple 2-story structure built of local timber, needed paint and repairs. Several fence rails were broken, and the barn door hung slightly askew. The yard was overgrown, though she could make out the remnants of what might once have been a kitchen garden. How much land? She asked, trying to assess what she'd inherited, 160 acres. Good water rights with the creek, about 30 head of cattle, I'd guess, though they're probably scattered across the back pasture. Ethan set the brake and hopped down from the wagon. Your uncle was a capable rancher before his health started failing last year. He talked about selling, but he was holding out hope you'd come west sooner. The knowledge that her uncle had been waiting for her had perhaps needed her sent a pang of guilt through Susannah. She delayed her departure from Boston, settling her parents' affairs and finishing the school term. If she'd come sooner. "Don't," Ethan said softly, seeming to read her thoughts as he helped her down. His hands were strong and sure at her waist. "Whatever you're thinking, it wouldn't have changed things." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The house key was where her uncle had described in his letters, beneath a particular stone near the front steps. Inside, the house was dusty but otherwise in reasonable condition. Simple furnishings, a stone fireplace and windows that let in plenty of light, a kitchen with an iron stove, a small parlor, and upstairs, 2 bedrooms. Her uncle had lived modestly but comfortably. "It's better than I expected," she admitted as they returned downstairs. "House is sound," Ethan agreed. "It's the ranch operations that need attention. Without someone working the cattle and fields, things fall apart quick." Susannah wandered to the kitchen window, which overlooked the barn and corral. "I know nothing about ranching," she confessed. "You could sell," Ethan suggested, though he didn't sound enthusiastic about the idea. "There are buyers who'd take the whole outfit, land and livestock." "And then what would I do?" she asked, turning to face him. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "You said you're a teacher." "That's still an option. With no position secured and limited funds to sustain me while I search. And where would I live in the meantime?" Susannah shook her head. "No, Mr. Townsend, I believe I'll need to learn about cattle." A smile spread across his face, a genuine one that reached his eyes and transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made Susannah's heart beat a little faster. "That's the spirit. Your uncle would approve." He straightened. "Look, I have to get back to the Diamond Tea tonight, but I'm off tomorrow. I could come by, help you take stock of what you've got here, maybe round up some of those cattle so you can count them proper." The offer was generous, too generous. "Why would you do that? You hardly know me." Ethan considered her question seriously. "3 reasons. 1, I respected your uncle. 2, I know what it's like to be a stranger in a new place with no one to turn to. And 3, he grinned, I admire anyone who stands their ground against Martha Prescott's moral crusades." Susannah couldn't help but laugh. She was rather formidable, wasn't she? Town busybody, self-appointed guardian of proper behavior. Ethan rolled his eyes. Her husband owns the bank, so she thinks that gives her authority over everyone's affairs. "Well then, Mr. Townsend, I accept your help with gratitude," Susannah said, extending her hand as she had earlier. This time, Ethan held it a moment longer. "Call me Ethan. I reckon if I'm going to teach you ranching, we can dispense with formalities." "Ethan," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her tongue. "Then I'm Susannah." He released her hand reluctantly. "I should head back. There's food in the pantry. Your uncle always kept basics on hand. I'll bring more supplies tomorrow." After he left, the house felt suddenly empty and still. Susannah explored more thoroughly, running her fingers over her uncle's possessions, trying to connect with the man she'd known only through letters. In his bedroom, she found a small, framed photograph of herself as a child, sent years ago, displayed prominently beside his bed. The sight brought tears to her eyes. As daylight faded, she lit the lamps and prepared a simple meal from the pantry stores. Sitting at the kitchen table, she felt the full weight of her situation. She owned a ranch she couldn't run, in a community that had already judged her, with limited funds and no immediate prospects for income. And yet, there had been Ethan Townsend, with his kind eyes and easy acceptance. Perhaps Walla Walla held promise after all. Morning came with birdsong and golden light streaming through windows that needed washing. Susannah had slept surprisingly well in her uncle's spare room, exhausted from travel and emotional upheaval. Rising early, she dressed in her customary trousers and a fresh shirt, then set about exploring the ranch by daylight. The property had good bones, she decided, despite its current neglect. The creek provided reliable water, the soil in the fields looked rich, and the pastures were abundant with native grasses. With proper management, it could be productive again. But what did she know of proper management? Her education had prepared her to teach children reading and arithmetic, not to breed cattle or grow crops. She was contemplating this problem while attempting to repair a broken fence rail when the sound of hoofbeats announced a visitor. Turning, she saw Ethan approaching on horseback, leading a pack mule laden with supplies. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle, and Susannah found herself watching the way he moved with the horse as a single unit. "Good morning." He called, raising a hand in greeting. "You're earlier than I expected," she replied, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Thought we might get more done that way." He dismounted in one fluid motion, then began unloading supplies from the mule. "I see you've already started on the fence." "Attempting to, at least," Susannah admitted, looking ruefully at her inexpert work. Ethan examined her efforts. "Not bad for a first try. Here, let me show you a trick." For the next hour, he demonstrated proper fence repair techniques, explaining each step clearly. Susannah proved a quick study, her hands soon becoming more confident with the tools. "You're a natural," Ethan commented as they finished the section. "Hardly," she laughed, "but I appreciate the flattery, not flattery. You listen well and aren't afraid to try." That's half the battle with ranch work. He wiped his brow with a bandana. "Let's take a look at those cattle next." They saddled 2 horses from the barn. Susannah's riding skills were adequate, though rusty, and rode out to the back pastures. As they crested a hill, they spotted a group of about 20 cattle grazing by a small pond. "There's most of them," Ethan said. "Let's get closer so you can see what you've got." As they approached, Susannah observed the animals with a critical eye. Even to her inexperienced gaze, they looked healthy enough, if somewhat wild from lack of handling. "Mostly Herefords," Ethan explained. "Good breed, hardy for this climate. I count 22 here. Your uncle's records showed 35 total, so we'll need to find the rest." "How do you tell which ones are mine?" Susannah asked, realizing she'd never considered the question before. Ethan pointed to a brand visible on the nearest steer's flank. "That's the Lawson mark, L with a crossbar. Every rancher has a registered brand." They spent the morning locating the remaining cattle, with Ethan explaining basic animal husbandry as they worked. By midday, they'd accounted for 32 head, 3 missing. Ethan frowned. "Could be strays or," he trailed off, "or," Susannah prompted, "could be rustlers." "There's been trouble with that lately." He shook his head. "Let's head back for some food, then we can check the records in your uncle's office. Need to see what bills are outstanding, what income might be coming." Over a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples from the supplies Ethan had brought, Susannah found herself studying him. There was something about the quiet competence with which he approached every task that she found compelling. "Tell me about yourself," she said. "How did you come to be in Washington Territory?" Ethan considered while chewing. "Not much to tell. Grew up in East Texas on a small farm. When my folks died, fever took them both. When I was 18, I had 2 choices: take over the failing farm or find something else. I chose the something else." He shrugged. "Signed on with a cattle drive heading north, worked my way through Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, eventually ended up here. And the Diamond T, is that a good position? Owner's fair, pays decent. I've worked my way up to foreman of the eastern section." Pride flickered in his eyes. "Someday I'd like my own spread, but land prices keep climbing." "You're not married?" Susannah asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." Ethan just smiled. "No, I'm not. Haven't found the right woman, I suppose. Or maybe I've been too focused on saving for that ranch of my own." He tilted his head, studying her. "What about you? No husband waiting back east?" "No," she said simply. "I was engaged once to a colleague at the school where I taught, but he—" She hesitated, the memory still painful. "He decided my independent nature was charming during courtship, but would be unsuitable in a wife. Particularly, my insistence on wearing trousers when the occasion warranted practical clothing." Ethan's expression darkened. "Sounds like a fool. Perhaps. Or perhaps he saved us both from an unhappy marriage." She stood, gathering their plates. "Shall we look at those records now?" In her uncle's small office, they found ledgers meticulously kept until about 2 months before, when the entries became sporadic, then stopped entirely. The financial picture was concerning but not dire. There were outstanding debts to the mercantile and the blacksmith, taxes due at the end of the quarter, and expenses for upcoming winter feed to consider. On the income side, 10 steers were contracted to be sold to the Army at Fort Walla Walla next month if they could be delivered. You've got enough to keep afloat if those Army cattle get delivered, Ethan concluded, closing the ledger. But it's tight, Susannah sighed. And I have no idea how to deliver cattle to the fort. I could help with that, Ethan offered. It's only a day's drive. I have 3 days off next week. Ethan, Susannah said seriously, you've already done so much. I can't keep imposing on your good nature. It's not an imposition. He seemed to struggle with what to say next. I like spending time here, with you. The admission clearly cost him some effort, and color rose in his face. Warmth spread through Susannah's chest at his words. I enjoy your company too, she replied softly. But I need to learn to manage on my own. I can't rely on your charity forever. Not charity, he corrected firmly. Partnership. You need help with the ranch work. I can provide that. In return, he hesitated. Yes, she prompted. A slow smile spread across his face. In return, you could teach me about those books you brought. I saw them in your trunk yesterday. Never had much formal schooling, but I've always wanted to learn more. Susannah was touched by the request. You want me to teach you, if you're willing. I figure we could help each other. His expression was earnest, at least until you decide whether to keep the ranch or sell it. It was a sensible arrangement, and one that would benefit them both. Still, Susannah felt a flutter of something that went beyond practicality when she considered spending more time with Ethan Townsend. I accept your proposal, she said finally. Partners. Ethan's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Partners. Over the following days, Susannah threw herself into learning everything she could about the ranch. Ethan came by whenever his duties at the Diamond T allowed, teaching her about cattle management, basic veterinary care, and maintenance of the buildings and fences. In the evenings, they would sit by lamplight at the kitchen table while Susannah shared her knowledge of literature, history, and mathematics. Ethan proved an eager and intelligent student, absorbing new concepts quickly despite his limited formal education. Susannah found teaching him deeply satisfying, perhaps even more so than her work at the Boston school. There was something pure about his desire to learn, untainted by social expectations or academic competition. A week after her arrival, Sheriff Mills and his deputy delivered her uncle's personal effects from town, mostly clothing, and a few books, along with a small sum of money found in his room at the doctor's house, where he'd spent his final days. Miss Lawson, the sheriff said as they prepared to leave, I should mention that Martha Prescott has been making some noise about your living situation. Susannah stiffened. What do you mean? She's concerned about propriety, what with you being out here alone and Townsend visiting regularly. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. I told her to mind her own business, but you know how talk spreads. My relationship with Mr. Townsend is entirely proper, Susannah said firmly. He's helping me with the ranch and I'm tutoring him in exchange. No need to convince me, the sheriff assured her. Just thought you should be aware of the gossip. This territory's more civilized than it was 10 years ago, but folks still have old-fashioned notions. After they departed, Susannah paced the kitchen, frustrated by Martha Prescott's interference. The woman had never even spoken directly to her beyond that first confrontation, yet felt entitled to judge her living situation and relationships. When Ethan arrived that evening to help with a leaking roof, she related the conversation with the sheriff. Are you concerned about your reputation? He asked carefully after listening. Susannah laughed without humor. My reputation was apparently decided the moment I stepped off that stagecoach in trousers, but I am concerned about yours. I wouldn't want your employment at the Diamond T jeopardized because of association with me. Ethan set down the mug of coffee she'd given him. My boss doesn't listen to town gossip. Besides, his eyes held her steadily. I'm a grown man. I choose my own friends. Friends. The word felt both right and somehow insufficient for what was developing between them. Still, she said, perhaps we should be more circumspect. Meet in town for our lessons or Susannah, Ethan interrupted gently. Do you want me to stop coming here? No, she answered honestly. I don't. Then I won't. Let people talk. He smiled that smile that made her heart race. Now, show me where that roof's leaking. The day before they were to deliver the cattle to Fort Walla Walla, Susannah rode into town for supplies. She'd grown more comfortable with the 5-mile journey, though she still received stares when she arrived on horseback, wearing her practical trousers and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from the late summer sun. At Thornton's Mercantile, she secured the items on her list and was arranging for delivery when Martha Prescott entered with several companions. Seeing Susannah, the woman's lips pursed as if she'd tasted something sour. "Mrs. Prescott," Susannah acknowledged politely, determined to maintain civility despite the woman's obvious disapproval. "Miss Lawson," Martha replied coolly, "I see you're still sporting your unusual attire." Susannah merely nodded, unwilling to engage in another debate about her clothing choices. "I understand Mr. Townsend has been quite the regular visitor at your ranch," Martha continued, her tone insinuating. The mercantile owner, Mr. Thornton, suddenly became very interested in arranging items on a nearby shelf, though Susannah could tell he was listening intently. "Mr. Townsend has kindly assisted me with ranch operations while I become familiar with my inheritance," Susannah replied evenly. "His knowledge has been invaluable." "I'm sure," Martha said with a tight smile. "One wonders what you're offering in return for such dedicated attention." The implication was unmistakable, and Susannah felt heat rise to her face not from embarrassment, but from anger. "Mrs. Prescott," she said quietly, "I understand that you consider yourself the moral authority of Walla Walla. However, your insinuations about my character and Mr. Townsend's are not only incorrect but unkind. I would thank you to keep such thoughts to yourself." Martha's eyes widened at the direct confrontation. "Well, I never, Miss Lawson is teaching me to read better," came Ethan's voice from the doorway. He stood there with an easy confidence, though his eyes were hard as they rested on Martha. "And to cipher, skills I never got much schooling in. That's what she offers in exchange for my help with the ranch work." The mercantile fell silent. Martha and her friends stared at Ethan, clearly surprised by both his appearance and his admission about his education. "I see," Martha said finally. "Well, that's commendable, isn't it?" Ethan agreed, moving to stand beside Susannah. "Miss Lawson is an excellent teacher, patient, knowledgeable, the kind of educator this territory needs." Mr. Thornton, apparently deciding to break the tension, stepped forward. "Miss Lawson, your order will be ready for delivery tomorrow morning." "Thank you," Susannah said gratefully, gathering her reticule. "Mrs. Prescott, ladies, good day." Outside, Susannah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you for intervening, though I'm sorry you had to reveal personal information to do so." Ethan shrugged. "No shame in admitting where you lack learning, more shame in pretending you know everything." He nodded toward the end of the street. "I was heading to the feed store when I saw you go into Thornton's. Thought I might catch you before you headed back to the ranch." They walked together, drawing curious glances from townspeople. "You know," Ethan said thoughtfully, "there might be a way to silence the gossips and help your situation at the same time." "Oh," Susannah raised an eyebrow, "and what might that be?" "Teaching. Officially, I mean." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I spoke with some folks at the Diamond T who have school-age children. They're desperate for education but can't send their kids all the way into town. If you were to start a school for the outlying ranches and farms." Susannah considered the idea. "It would provide income, utilize her skills, and perhaps even improve her standing in the community." "Where would this school be held?" she asked. "Your ranch has that old bunkhouse that's not being used. With some cleaning and simple furniture, it could serve as a schoolroom." Ethan's enthusiasm was evident. "I've already got commitments from 6 families with a total of 14 children. They'd pay monthly tuition just like in town." Susannah was touched by his initiative. "You've been planning this, thinking about it," he admitted. "Wanted to make sure there was interest before I suggested it." The idea took root in her mind, blossoming with possibilities. A school of her own where she could teach without the constraints of Boston's rigid educational system. A way to become part of this community while maintaining her independence. "Ethan Townsend," she said, smiling up at him, "you are full of surprises." His answering smile made her heart skip. "Is that a yes?" "It's definitely worth considering," she replied. Let's discuss it further after we deliver those cattle tomorrow. The cattle drive to Fort Walla Walla began at dawn the next day. With Ethan's guidance, Susannah helped gather the 10 steers contracted to the army and move them toward the fort. Though the journey was only 15 miles, it required constant attention to keep the animals together and moving in the right direction. Susannah, once again grateful for her practical trousers, found the work exhausting but exhilarating. There was a rhythm to it, a dance between rider, horse, and cattle that required focus and quick reactions. By midday, when they stopped to rest the animals at a creek, she was sore but satisfied with their progress. "You're a natural," Ethan commented as they shared a simple lunch of jerky, hardtack, and water from their canteens. "Hardly," Susannah laughed, stretching her aching shoulders, "but I'm learning." "Most city folks would have given up after the first hour," he said seriously. "You've got grit, Susannah Lawson." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Over the past weeks, she'd grown increasingly aware of her feelings for Ethan. What had begun as gratitude for his help had developed into something deeper: admiration for his character, enjoyment of his company, and a physical attraction she found difficult to ignore. But she'd come west to build an independent life, not to fall in love. And despite his kindness, Ethan had never indicated that his interest was anything more than friendship and mutual assistance. They delivered the cattle to the fort by late afternoon. The army quartermaster, after inspecting the animals, paid the agreed sum in cash, a substantial amount that would cover Susannah's outstanding debts and provide operating funds for the ranch through winter. "A successful day's work," Ethan said as they rode away from the fort, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and amber. "Indeed," Susannah agreed, the weight of the money safely secured in an inner pocket. "I couldn't have done it without you. Soon you won't need my help," he replied. Was there a note of regret in his voice, or was she imagining it? "About that school idea," she said, changing the subject. "I've been thinking it has merit. If there's genuine interest from families, I could start as early as next month." Ethan's face brightened. "Really, that's wonderful. I could help with the bunkhouse conversion on my days off." "You've already done so much," Susannah protested. "Surely you have better uses for your free time." He looked at her steadily, something unreadable in his blue eyes. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be, Susannah." The words hung between them in the golden evening light, charged with meaning neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. They made camp that night in a protected hollow, as the return journey would require another day's travel. Ethan built a small fire while Susannah prepared a simple meal from their provisions. The domesticity of the scene struck her as they sat side by side, watching the flames dance in the gathering darkness. "Tell me about Boston," Ethan said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Do you miss it?" Susannah considered the question. "I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the concerts, some dear friends, but Boston never quite felt like home, especially after my parents died." She looked up at the vast expanse of stars overhead, more brilliant than she'd ever seen in the city. "There's a freedom here that I never experienced there. Freedom to wear trousers," Ethan teased gently. She laughed. "Among other things, freedom to define myself, perhaps. In Boston, I was always Dr. Lawson's eccentric daughter. Here," she gestured to the open land around them. "Here I can be whoever I choose to be." "And who do you choose to be?" Ethan asked, his voice soft in the firelight. Susannah turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her. "I'm still discovering that," she admitted, "but I think I'd like to be a woman who makes a difference. Who builds something meaningful." "The school," he nodded. "Yes, the school, and perhaps the ranch as well," she smiled ruefully. "Ambitious for a woman who knew nothing about cattle a month ago. You're a quick study, and determination counts for more than experience sometimes." Ethan added another small branch to the fire. "For what it's worth, I think you can do it, both the school and the ranch. With help," she acknowledged. "Everyone needs help sometimes, doesn't make you any less independent." They fell silent again, the crackling of the fire and distant sounds of nocturnal creatures the only interruption to the quiet night. "There was a girl back in Texas," Ethan said suddenly. "Sarah was her name. We were sweet on each other as teenagers. Everyone expected us to marry." Susannah felt a strange tightness in her chest. "What happened?" She wanted a conventional life, a man who would take over his father's store, give her a home in town, children's security. He poked at the fire with a stick. I wanted more, something of my own earned by my own hands. When my parents died and I decided to leave, she couldn't understand. I'm sorry, Susannah said softly. Ethan shook his head. Don't be. She married the store owner's son the next year, has 4 children now. From what I hear, she got the life she wanted. He looked up at Susannah, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. But it made me cautious about letting myself care for someone who might have different dreams. The implication hung in the air between them, delicate as a soap bubble and just as fragile. And now? Susannah asked, her heart beating faster. What are your dreams now? Still my own land, he said. A ranch built by my own hands, but I've started to think there might be room for other dreams too. Before she could ask what he meant, a distant sound caught Ethan's attention. He tensed, listening intently. What is it? Susannah whispered. Riders, he said grimly. At night out here, that's rarely good news. He quickly kicked dirt over their fire, extinguishing it, then led Susannah and their horses into a stand of trees nearby. They watched as 3 riders approached their former campsite, visible now only by moonlight. Rustlers, most likely, Ethan murmured close to her ear. They've been hitting isolated homesteads and small herds, best to stay hidden until they move on. Susannah nodded, trying to control her breathing as the riders dismounted and examined the remains of their campfire. Still warm, one of them said. They can't be far. Probably that Lawson woman and her cowboy, another replied with a coarse laugh. Prescott says they've been thick as thieves. Convenient, the third man commented. Everyone will assume they ran off together when they're found dead and their cattle gone. Susannah felt Ethan tense beside her, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. We'll track them at first light, the first man decided. For now, let's make camp here. Save us the trouble of building our own fire. As the men settled in, Ethan leaned close to whisper, we need to get to the horses at the fort. If they've been tracking us, they may have others watching the ranch. Carefully, moving as silently as possible, they led their horses deeper into the woods and away from the campsite. Once they were far enough away, they mounted and rode through the darkness, using the moon and stars for navigation. Who were those men? Susannah asked when they were safely distant. Trouble, Ethan replied grimly. And they mentioned Prescott, that would be Martha's husband, the banker. I've had suspicions about him for a while. Seems mighty convenient how many struggling ranchers end up losing their property to his bank after suffering rustling losses. You think he's behind the rustling? Susannah was shocked. I think he benefits from it, at least. Ethan guided his horse around a fallen log. And now they're targeting your ranch, hoping to eliminate witnesses at the same time. But why? My ranch isn't particularly valuable. Your water rights are. That creek on your property feeds several downstream ranches. Control the water, control the land. Ethan's expression was hard in the moonlight. We need to get to the fort and warn the sheriff. They reached Fort Walla Walla just before dawn, exhausted from the night's journey. The officer on duty, recognizing them from the previous day's cattle delivery, allowed them to speak with the commander. Colonel Harrison listened gravely to their account of the rustlers and their overheard conversation. Serious accusations against a prominent citizen, he noted when they finished. We're reporting what we heard, sir, Ethan replied respectfully. The colonel nodded. I'll send a messenger to Sheriff Mills immediately. In the meantime, you're welcome to rest here until it's safe to return to town. After the messenger departed, they were offered quarters to rest. Despite her exhaustion, Susannah found sleep elusive. The danger they'd narrowly escaped, combined with the unresolved conversation with Ethan by the campfire, left her mind racing. By mid-morning, Sheriff Mills arrived at the fort with 2 deputies. He took their statements separately, asking detailed questions about the men they'd observed and exactly what had been said. This matches other reports we've received, he told them afterward. We've suspected organized rustling for months, but had no concrete evidence linking it to anyone in particular. Will you arrest Prescott? Susannah asked. The sheriff sighed. Not yet. Overheard conversation isn't enough, but we'll set a trap at your ranch. If they're planning to rustle your cattle, we'll be waiting for them. The plan was simple. Susannah and Ethan would return to the ranch as if nothing had happened, accompanied discreetly by deputies who would hide in strategic locations. If the rustlers attacked, they would be caught in the act. "It's risky," Ethan argued. "I don't like using Susannah as bait." "I'm not asking your permission, Mr. Townsend," Susannah said firmly. "This is my ranch and my decision. If these men are threatening my property and my neighbors, I want them stopped." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue further but respected her resolve. "Then I'm staying with you. No discussion." The return to the ranch was tense, every shadow and sound a potential threat. The deputies followed at a distance, taking hidden positions around the property once they arrived. Ethan insisted on staying in the house with Susannah, sleeping on the sofa downstairs while she took her bedroom upstairs. For 2 days, nothing happened. Life continued as normal. They tended the cattle, worked on repairs, and continued their evening lessons. But underneath the routine ran a current of tension, awareness of the danger that could come at any moment. On the third night, Susannah was awakened by a soft knock at her bedroom door. She opened it to find Ethan, fully dressed, his expression grim. "They're here," he whispered. Sheriff's deputy just signaled from the barn, at least 6 men approaching from the north pasture. Susannah quickly dressed in her trousers and a warm shirt, then followed Ethan downstairs. He handed her a shotgun. "Stay inside," he instructed. "I'm going to join the deputies." "No," she said firmly. "This is my ranch. I'm not hiding while others defend it." Their eyes met in the dim lamplight, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Ethan nodded. "Stay close to me then, and if I tell you to get down, you get down, no arguments." They slipped out onto the porch, keeping to the shadows. In the moonlight, Susannah could make out dark figures moving toward the cattle pen. The sheriff and his deputies were positioned around the property, waiting for the rustlers to commit to their crime before moving in. Suddenly, a shot rang out, followed by shouts of alarm. The rustlers, realizing they'd been discovered, abandoned their attempt at stealth. Gunfire erupted across the yard as the deputies engaged the intruders. "Down." Ethan commanded, pulling Susannah behind the porch railing as bullets splintered wood above their heads. Heart pounding, she peered through the rails, trying to make sense of the chaotic scene. The sheriff's voice boomed across the yard, ordering the rustlers to surrender, but was met with more gunfire. A movement to their right caught Susannah's attention, a figure rushing toward the porch, gun raised. "Ethan," she warned, bringing up her shotgun instinctively. Ethan spun, firing at the approaching threat. The man cried out and fell, but not before getting off a shot of his own. Susannah felt rather than heard Ethan's grunt of pain as he collapsed beside her. "Ethan," she gasped, dropping the shotgun to catch him as he fell. "I'm all right," he managed, though his voice was tight with pain. "Just grazed my side." The gunfire around them gradually subsided as the sheriff and deputies gained the upper hand. Shouts of surrender mingled with commands to drop weapons. Susannah, heedless of potential danger, focused entirely on Ethan, examining his wound by the dim light spilling from the house. The bullet had indeed only grazed him, tearing through his shirt and leaving a bloody furrow along his ribs. It was bleeding freely, but didn't appear life-threatening. "Let me help you inside," she insisted, supporting him as he rose unsteadily to his feet. In the kitchen, she cleaned and bandaged his wound with steady hands, though her heart still raced with the aftermath of danger and the realization of how close she'd come to losing him. "Thank you," he said softly, watching her face as she worked. "You handled yourself well out there." "So did you," she replied, tying off the bandage, "though I wish you hadn't been hurt protecting me." Ethan caught her hand as she withdrew it from his bandaged side. "I would do it again without hesitation." Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the unspoken feelings of the past weeks crystallized into certainty. Susannah leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed him gently. Ethan responded immediately, his free hand coming up to cradle her face as he returned the kiss with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they separated, his eyes searched hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he confessed, a smile tugging at his lips despite his pain. "What took you so long?" she asked, her own smile reflecting his. "Wasn't sure a lady like you would want a rough cowboy like me." he admitted. Susannah laughed softly. And I wasn't sure a traditional man like you would want a woman who insists on wearing trousers. You look perfect to me, he said simply, echoing his words from their first meeting. Everything about you is perfect to me. Their second kiss was interrupted by Sheriff Mills clearing his throat from the doorway. They separated, Susannah feeling a blush heat her cheeks despite the circumstances. We've got them all, the sheriff announced, politely pretending not to notice their embrace. Including George Prescott himself. He showed up to supervise once the shooting started, made the mistake of giving orders within earshot of my deputy. Is anyone hurt? Susannah asked, returning to her role as hostess despite the extraordinary situation. Two of the rustlers took bullets. Doc seeing to them now, none of our men seriously injured. The sheriff removed his hat. Miss Lawson, your cooperation has been invaluable. These men have been terrorizing ranchers for months. With them behind bars, folks can sleep easier. I'm just glad it's over, she said sincerely. As the sheriff left to oversee the removal of the prisoners, Susannah returned to Ethan's side. His color was better, though he still winced when he moved. You should rest, she advised. I will if you'll sit with me, he replied, taking her hand. We have some unfinished business to discuss. Oh, she raised an eyebrow, though her heart quickened. Our conversation by the campfire, he reminded her. About dreams. Susannah settled beside him on the sofa. Yes, I remember. You were saying there might be room for dreams beyond having your own ranch. Ethan nodded, his expression serious despite the warmth in his eyes. Susannah, these past weeks have shown me something I never expected to find here, or anywhere for that matter. And what's that? She asked softly. A woman who understands what it means to forge your own path, who isn't afraid of hard work or what others might think. He squeezed her hand. A woman I could build a life with if she were willing. Susannah's breath caught. Ethan, are you not proposing? Not yet, he clarified with a small smile. I respect you too much to rush this, but I am declaring my intentions. I care for you, Susannah Lawson. More than I thought possible after such a short time, and I'd like to court you properly if you'll allow it. Joy bloomed in Susannah's chest, bright and warm. I care for you too, Ethan, very much. Even though I can't cipher as well as you, he teased. Even so, she laughed. Though your education is progressing admirably. His expression grew serious again. I need you to understand something. If we pursue this I would never ask you to give up your independence or your dreams. The school, the ranch, they're part of who you are, and I admire that. And I would never ask you to abandon your dream of your own land, she replied. Perhaps. She hesitated, then continued boldly, perhaps our dreams could become shared dreams in time. Ethan's smile was like sunrise breaking over the blue mountains. I'd like that very much. As dawn approached, bringing with it the promise of a new day and new beginnings, Susannah realized that her journey west had led her not just to a place, but to a person. A person who saw her clearly and accepted her completely, trousers and all. The aftermath of the rustler capture brought significant changes to Walla Walla. George Prescott and his accomplices faced trial and were sentenced to prison terms for their crimes. Martha Prescott, humiliated by her husband's arrest, sold their home and returned to St. Louis, much to the relief of those who had endured her moral judgments. With the rustlers behind bars, the surrounding ranches flourished without the threat of livestock theft. Susannah's standing in the community improved dramatically once word spread of her role in bringing the criminals to justice. No longer was she merely that woman in trousers. She became known as a courageous ranch owner who had stood her ground against dangerous men. True to her word, Susannah established her school in the renovated bunkhouse. Children from outlying farms and ranches attended 3 days a week, receiving an education that combined traditional subjects with practical knowledge suited to frontier life. The tuition provided a steady income to supplement the ranch operations. Ethan courted her properly, as he'd promised. They attended church together on Sundays, shared meals with neighbors, and enjoyed quiet evenings on the ranch discussing books and dreams. His reading improved rapidly under her tutelage, while her ranching skills developed under his patient guidance. 6 months after the night of the rustler capture, On a crisp spring evening with wildflowers carpeting the hills around the ranch, Ethan proposed. They sat on the porch swing he had built as a Christmas gift, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Susannah," he said, taking both her hands in his, "these have been the happiest months of my life. You've shown me that two people with independent spirits can still build something beautiful together." He slipped from the swing to one knee, producing a small velvet box. "I love your strength, your kindness, your determination, even your trousers," he added with a grin. "Will you marry me? Be my partner in all things?" Tears of happiness filled Susannah's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Ethan. Yes, I will." The ring was simple but beautiful, a small diamond set in gold, perfect for a woman who valued practicality but appreciated beauty. "It was my mother's," Ethan explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "The only thing of value I brought with me from Texas. It's perfect," she whispered before leaning down to seal their engagement with a kiss. They were married that summer in a ceremony attended by the entire community. Susannah wore a beautiful cream-colored wedding dress for the occasion, but beneath it, visible only when she lifted her skirts to climb into the wagon that would take them on their wedding journey, were her trusty canvas trousers. The guests laughed and cheered at the sight. The very garments that had once been the source of mockery now embraced as part of who she was. In the years that followed, the Lawson Townsend Ranch, as they chose to call it, honoring both their families, became one of the most successful in the territory. They expanded the cattle operation, added sheep and horses, and improved the irrigation systems to increase crop yields. The school continued to flourish, eventually becoming the model for other rural educational initiatives throughout Washington Territory. They worked side by side, each bringing their unique strengths to their partnership. Ethan's knowledge of ranching combined with Susannah's head for business and education created an operation that was both profitable and forward-thinking. They became known for adopting progressive practices in both agriculture and labor relations, treating their ranch hands fairly and introducing new breeding techniques that improved their livestock. 3 years after their marriage, Susannah gave birth to their first child, a son they named Henry, after her uncle who had unwittingly brought them together. 2 years later came a daughter, Elizabeth, who from her earliest days showed the same independent spirit as her mother. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Ethan surprised Susannah with a gift that brought tears to her eyes, a portrait of their family painted by a traveling artist. In it, Susannah stood proudly beside her husband, wearing the canvas trousers that had become her trademark, with little Henry holding her hand and baby Elizabeth in Ethan's arms. "So our children will always remember that their mother was a woman who charted her own course," Ethan explained as she admired the painting, "and that their father was wise enough to recognize her strength as beautiful." "I love you," Susannah said simply, leaning into his embrace. "And I love you," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Trousers and all. As they stood together, watching their children play in the yard of the home they'd built together, Susannah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the grief of losing her parents to the uncertainty of traveling west alone, to the mockery she'd faced upon arrival, every step, even the painful ones, had led her here, to a life of purpose and passion, to a man who saw her clearly and loved her completely, to a family and community where she belonged, exactly as she was. She hadn't just found a home in the wild, beautiful landscape of the Washington Territory. She'd found herself, and in doing so, she'd found everything else that mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Susannah smiled, watching as Henry attempted to teach his little sister how to lasso a fence post, both children laughing in the golden afternoon light. "I was thinking about journeys," she replied, "and how sometimes the path you never planned to take leads you exactly where you need to be." Ethan's arm tightened around her waist. "I'm mighty glad your path led you here, Susannah Townsend." "As am I," she said, turning to face the man who had first defended her, then loved her, and finally partnered with her to build a life neither of them could have imagined alone. "As am I." In the years that followed, their legacy grew along with their family. They would welcome two more children, twins James and Margaret, and watch as all four grew into capable, independent adults who carried forward their parents' values of hard work, education, and respect for each person's unique gifts. The Lawson Townsend Ranch became a landmark in the region, known for its hospitality as well as its prosperity. Travelers passing through Walla Walla often remarked on the unusual sight of a woman in trousers working alongside her husband, overseeing ranch operations with confidence and skill. And if anyone dared to comment disapprovingly on Susannah's attire, they would inevitably hear the story told with pride by longtime residents of how she had arrived in town years ago, been mocked for her practical clothing, and found a cowboy wise enough to say, "You look perfect to me." It was a love story that became part of the territory's folklore, a testament to the power of seeing beyond convention to the true worth of a person's heart. And for Susannah and Ethan, it was simply the foundation of a life well lived, side by side, partners in all things, exactly as they were meant to be.